What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So today we're going to cover one of Jack Ruby's associates, Irwin Weiner. So, believe it or not, the Warren Commission stuff on him is decent. Or is this the HSCA? No, the HSCA. Okay. So the Warren Commission is never decent. Sorry about that. Sorry about this misspeaking. This is from the HSCA report on Irwin Weiner. Obviously the Warren Commission is bogus. HSCA is mostly bogus. The ARRB was mostly bogus. A couple good players in there, but not usually. Doug Horn was on the ARRB. We'll talk about him in a future episode. So today, like I said, we're going to go over Mr. Irwin Sidney Weiner. Biographical summary. This is from the HSCA Report, Volume 9. Irwin Sidney Weiner was born on March 6, 1916 in Chicago. Son of Leon Weiner, a bookmaker who was shot to death in a murder-suicide incident in Chicago. Weiner has been described as 5 foot 5.5 inches tall, 160 pounds, stocky with blue eyes and brown hair. In 1970, he was residing in Niles, Illinois. He had never served in the military, had no felony record. Weiner's connections to organized crime were a dominant, if not pervasive, element in his life, and they included both direct links to the highest levels of organized crime nationally and in Chicago, and less definitive relationships with seemingly legitimate activities. In a Washington Post article, he was characterized as follows. Irwin Weiner is thought to be the underworld's major financial figure in the Midwest. Almost all documentation concerning Weiner contains references to known organized crime members, and a comprehensive list of his associates would include a significant number of major organized crime figures in the U.S. Treatment by the Warren Commission. The only reference to Irwin Weiner by the Warren Commission occurs in the Commission's examination of Jack Ruby's telephone records, which indicated a call from Ruby to Weiner in a Chicago number SH 3-6865 on October 26, 1963. Ruby was never questioned about this call. Weiner was never questioned at all. This omission is consistent with the Commission's overall failure to investigate possible organized crime connections. It was difficult, if not impossible, to determine if Irwin Weiner had any legitimate sources of income, since many of his business positions were primarily fronts or conduits for illegal activities. A February 1969 newspaper clipping characterized Weiner as the mob's foremost frontman. Weiner was ostensibly in the bail bonding and insurance business, acting both as a broker for other companies and on his own behalf. While Weiner's social position within organized crime circles was undoubtedly high, his status in the general community was unknown, as was his overall financial position. An indication of Weiner's wealth may be found in a 1963 FBI report, which stated that Weiner and his associate Saul Schwartz may have received up to $1 million in broker fees for negotiating Teamsters bonds. Weiner stated that he received several $100,000 for writing a Teamsters bond in the late 1950s. Following the passage of the Landrum-Griffin Act, a 1960 newspaper clipping stated that from November 1958 until November 1959, Weiner and two associates wrote over $1 million in bail bonds, while 30 agents working under Weiner wrote another $6 million. Weiner necessarily needed political and law enforcement connections, and FBI files indicate several instances of bribery and related pressures by Weiner. 1972 report notes an alleged payoff to the police in Niles, Illinois, for their cooperation. A 1974 FBI Airtel reports an alleged bribe by Weiner to an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago to have organized crime figure Sam Battaglia released from prison. Weiner had a very close relationship with Felix Milwaukee Phil Alderizio, whom Weiner had known since he was 13. Alderizio was a Midwestern organized crime figure. FBI files note that Weiner became the caretaker of Alderizio's interests after his death in 1971, and that Weiner had access to some stolen jewelry believed to be in Alderizio's possession at his death. Weiner stated that he and Alderizio were partners in a food shortening corporation and a real estate business. The shortening company was closed by a Chicago judge in August of 1961 amid allegations that it was employing illegal force to sell its products. Weiner and Alderizio had many meetings with other notorious organized crime figures, and Alderizio physically threatened at least one individual on Weiner's behalf. So I got to point out that Milwaukee Phil, Felix Alderizio, he's a name that pops up when you start studying Kennedy and you start getting into Chicago mob and you start to read about some of the theories of Chicago mob's involvement. You will see names like Nicoletti. You'll see names like Felix Alderizio. You will eventually come across James Licavoli. You will come across Angelo Bruno, who gets killed in Philadelphia. That is like the branch from the Chicago mob out to their satellites, you'd call them, in Cleveland and other places. But there's an overwhelming collection of, how do I say this? Let me rephrase this. A lot of the writings about the Chicago mob's involvement in the assassination revolves heavily around making accusations against Alderizio, Richard Kane, Lenny Patrick. That one turns out to be true, and we'll get to Lenny Patrick a little bit here today, but I really need to find and organize my notes on Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris, because they're the Chicago outfit guys, other than the Cleveland guys who were involved in the assassination, Dave Yaris being the shooter at the pergola. Or at least one of the shooters at the pergola. There might have been another shooter behind the pergola, in which case it would have been Danny Green. But I can't necessarily put a rifle in Danny Green's hand. I just know that Danny Green was there behind the pergola, and I know that he was a sniper trainer in the fucking Marines, okay? So he was too young to be a handler, and he was the head of the Longshoremen's Union at the time, so he was definitely there to be a shooter. And so I can't say that with certainty, though. Right? It's mostly speculation, but it's educated speculation on my part. But what I was saying is you'll come across all these names when you start to dig into the mob related to the assassination, right? It's really fascinating how much time I spent on guys like Felix Alderizio and Angelo Bruno. I really like Angelo Bruno. Like, as far as mob bosses go, he was a nice guy. Like, I liked him a lot. His policies were fair and old school. The manner in which he was taken out, I don't think that there was no conspiracy there. Somebody got ahead of themselves. I forget who killed Angelo Bruno, but he did it without the permission of the five families, right? And so they ended up. I forget if they retaliated against his killer. And remember that they didn't like that he did it outside the permission of the five families. He probably would have gotten the permission of the five families if he'd have gone to them at the time. Because Bruno was he was on the outs with some of these other guys up in the Northeast. So, all right, let me continue. Weiner stated that he and Alderizio were partners in a food shortening corporation and a real estate business. The shortening company, I'm assuming like cooking shortening, was closed by a Chicago judge in August of 1961 amid allegations it was employing illegal force to sell its products. Sounds just like what the mob would do. Weiner and Alderizio had many meetings with other notorious organized crime figures, and Alderizio physically threatened at least one individual on Weiner's behalf. The most lucrative relationship between Weiner and organized crime seemed to be with the Teamsters Union, particularly with James Hoffa and Alan Dorfman. Red Dorfman. They and Weiner are consistently grouped together by the FBI in their files, with Weiner's background and abilities as an insurance broker and bail bondsman apparently useful in manipulating the Teamsters Union pension funds to the advantage of the three as well as many others. The most well-known of these endeavors involved a large $900,000 loan by the Central States, Southeast, and Southwest Areas Pension Fund to Gaylor Products, Inc., a New Mexico company with several subsidiaries. It allegedly manufactured children's toys and other plastic products such as pails. Weiner was listed as the president of this company, with Roland DeAngelis as vice president. The loan was negotiated by Weiner through Alan Dorfman. Reportedly, this company was fraudulent and merely a front to permit business and plane trips to South America for Teamsters officials and hoodlum elements. Gaylor Products Inc. Let's see what we can't find on that. Gaylur Products Inc. See if anything pops up. A New Mexico company. The loan was negotiated by Weiner through Alan Dorfman. Reportedly, this company was fraudulently a front to permit businesses and plane trips to South America for Teamsters officials and hoodlum elements. So this sounds more like mob working with government type stuff. In February 1974, Weiner was indicted with 6 other individuals, including DeAngelis and Dorfman, for the fraudulent use of over $1.4 million of Teamsters funds in connection with Gaylor Products, Inc. The prosecution's seemingly strong case crumbled when its key witness, Daniel Seifert, was brutally murdered on September 27, 1974, just before the trial was scheduled to begin. Weiner was subsequently acquitted. The FBI conducted an extensive investigation into Seifert's death. Weiner was considered a prime suspect, but the case was never satisfactorily solved. The Teamsters also used Weiner's talents by involving him and his many corporate entities in the bonding of individual union chapters across the nation. Weiner's abilities are also evident in the bonding of Teamsters financed projects such as hotels, motels, and other businesses. These activities have linked Weiner with projects in many cities, including Miami and Las Vegas. The financing and bonding of the Dallas Cabana was apparently handled by one of Weiner's bonding associates in Chicago, Saul Schwartz. There is no indication that Weiner has had any direct business links to Dallas. Weiner has allegedly also been involved in various other illegal activities in the Chicago area. One example was defrauding the national welfare and Medicare systems located in Chicago through the manipulation of funds and pharmacists and the deliberate burning of Medicare clinics for sham insurance claims. Weiner had been linked to the arson of restaurants and nightclubs, resulting in insurance fraud. A 1962 FBI memorandum refers to Weiner as being in control of concessions at the Park District of Chicago, thereby receiving kickbacks and payoffs. A 1973 report states that Weiner was handling all the skimmed money from Las Vegas for Chicago's organized crime community. Weiner's organized crime links extended to Cuba and to Santos Trafficante. Weiner admitted knowing Trafficante and meeting him in both Cuba and Florida. He had spoken to him as recently as 1977. A 1962 FBI memorandum from Herbert J. Miller also reflects this. For example, Weiner has boasted, and those who were in the know in Cuba have confirmed, that for his services to Phil Alderizio, Santos Trafficante, etc., he was given a substantial interest in the Deauville gambling casino and at the Capri gambling casino in Havana. When Weiner last talked about this, he was crying about the loss of a vast fortune occasioned by Castro. So Weiner is directly up in there with Trafficante and the operations at the Capri. And if that's the case, that means he was also directly connected to Meyer Lansky, the boss of all bosses of all time. So Weiner most certainly seems to have been a very, very important financial person in the machine that was the Chicago outfit. And hopefully you can see that the Chicago outfit, while it seemingly had its heyday in the days of Al Capone and Frank Nitti and Elliot Ness and those guys, by the late 1950s and early 1960s, their tentacles were all over the country, right? So when you have people like Irwin Weiner, who is involved in dealings with Santos Trafficante down in Havana, what you really have is the Chicago outfit set up in Havana, right? So Weiner being a financial guy for the outfit, anything he was involved in was the outfit, right? So the outfit's tentacles stretched everywhere. That's why when you have places like Cleveland, which were satellites of Chicago, under the control at the time of the assassination of John Scalish, who was a former Chicago guy, right? So they send their people out to go and work around all over the country, right? So when when I was initially talking to Ryan Dawson about the assassination like 6 fucking years ago or more, his overall summation of the assassination was that it was the Chicago outfit. And I guess technically you could say that. Technically. That to me would imply that the outfit had a higher position in the hierarchy than Trafficante in Florida. And Trafficante in Florida is who brought in Jack Valenti, right? The Valenti family ties to Trafficante in Tampa go way back. So I guess you could kind of say it was overarching the Chicago outfit, even though more specifically I would not include any of David Ferry's guys involved in that at all, right? So technically what you have is a Chicago outfit and David Ferry's crew. And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. The Chicago outfit and David Ferry's crew. Because Cleveland would fall under the outfit. And really, that was the coordination of the 3 mob bosses. That's it. That's the whole thing, right? Seemingly parallel in New Orleans to Clay Shaw and Centre Mondial Commercial and Permindex and the Mossad side of things, right? David Ferry having been the crossover, right? David Ferry is that link in the fucking chain. So here we go. Let's walk through this for a second. You've got the orders that came down through Clay Shaw, Centre Mondial Commercial, Montreal, Louis Bloomfield, directly to New Orleans. And that's David Ferry, and then David Ferry's group, including Arcacha, Emilio Santana, and then our 3 mercenaries, right? And then a handful of David Ferry's guys as support guys, like Thomas Beckham, who's photographed at the airport, and Leighton Martins, and Alvin Beaubouf, right? Those guys. And then you have Chicago outfit, trickles down to Cleveland, who supplied the 3 tramps. Well, generally speaking, the old tramp and the tall tramp, right? And then the short tramp being Vincent Caltagirone, who was connected through, multiple connections, right? Through the CIA, through Jack Valenti, and through, who else? No, I guess that would have been it for him. But you see, that's 2 mob bosses right there. Marcelo, down in New Orleans, being the immediate boss of David Ferry, and simultaneously Clay Shaw being the hierarchical position up from David Ferry down there, right? So I don't know of any direct meetings between Clay Shaw and Marcelo or any of Marcelo's guys. Maybe we should look for that. A direct connection between, and I'm not talking just like one person, I'm like a direct fucking meeting with people with the last name Marcelo and Clay Shaw. That's it. Not an individual go-between, right? Not like Joe Marcello was hanging out at one of these meetings, right? So something a little more connecting than that. But obviously it's there. So you have the New Orleans people under David Ferry, which comes in parallel to, which is parallel between the Permindex stuff and the mob stuff, right? Which came down through Marcelo. And then Trafficante brings in the Knoll shooter, and then you have Yaris and Patrick coming in from Chicago. And there you go. That's all of it. So that's the infrastructure, but it's interesting that guys like Weiner here seemingly span this shit, right? This goes to show how entrenched these mob guys are with the government. Because when you start talking about fucking Havana, you're talking about direct dealings with Castro, and you're talking about direct dealings with the Israelis and direct dealings with the CIA, right? The CIA's got their hands in everybody's pocket who's got money. Weiner denied ever holding any interest in Cuban gambling casinos or losing any money as a result of Castro's takeover. In April or May of 1960, Weiner reportedly made a trip to Havana with Alan Dorfman, Charles Bray, and Stuart Hopps to set up various agency and company relationships. Weiner admitted making several trips to Cuba in 1958 or 1959, but stated they were pleasure trips. When asked about the aforementioned trip, Weiner acknowledged that it was made in relation to an insurance company that these individuals had formed. Weiner had been arrested only a few times for someone as involved as he was in criminal activities. A charge of automobile accessory theft in 1934 had been dismissed. A 1972 FBI report notes an arrest in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1936 for investigation. A 1951 arrest for bookmaking resulted in a sentence of 2 years probation and a $1,250 fine. In 1964, Weiner was acquitted of a federal extortion racket. Most recently, he was acquitted of the 1974-75 Teamsters fraud case. Relationship with Ruby. The only definite and documented contact between Weiner and Jack Ruby was the 12-minute telephone call from Ruby to Weiner on Saturday, October 26, 1963 at 12:07 p.m. The Warren Commission inferred that this call was related to Ruby's 1963 labor problems concerning amateur nights at Dallas nightclubs, although it did not completely investigate the circumstances of the call. On November 27, 1963, Weiner had refused to explain the call's details to the FBI. He told the committee that FBI agents had contacted his daughter in order to leave a message for him and had frightened her, thus causing Weiner's recalcitrant attitude when the agents spoke to him. The FBI made no further attempt to interview Weiner. The Ruby FBI files contain information that Irwin Weiner told an organized crime associate that he knew Jack Ruby but had refused to discuss this matter with the FBI. In 1974, a private investigator seeking these details was threatened by Weiner during a telephone conversation. A subsequent investigator was told in January 1978 that the call was more than that of a stranger who needed help with his nightclub, and that the call had nothing to do with labor problems, the American Guild of Variety Artists, or national security interests. This investigator was also told that Weiner and Ruby had been friends, had been acquainted for some time, and had spoken in person and by telephone on numerous occasions. During his May 1978 executive session testimony before the committee, Weiner stated that he might have told these individuals anything, as he was not under oath and always lied to reporters. Testimony before the committee. In his committee testimony, Weiner offered the following explanation of the October 26th call. Jack Ruby called me. Evidently, he had a nightclub in Dallas, Texas. He had a striptease night. One night a week he had an amateur striptease. Some union that was affiliated with entertainers stopped him. They asked him to stop because the amateur entertainers were not members of the union. He stopped and another competitor of his opened up. He called me and wanted to know if I would write a bond. He was looking to get an injunction. The lawyer told him if he got an injunction, he would have to put up a bond. He asked me if I would do that, and I told him no. Then he told me that he was going to file a lawsuit. That was the extent of our conversation. It was just a relation to that. I never heard from him since, and I never heard from him prior to that. Weiner stated that this was the extent of their conversation, although the telephone records list the call as being 12 minutes in length. The committee did not find any other evidence that Ruby was contemplating litigation to resolve the labor problems with his competitors. Weiner guessed that Jack Ruby called him because of Weiner's acquaintance with Jack's brother, Earl Ruby. Earl Ruby told the FBI on November 26, 1963, that he had gone to high school in Chicago with Irwin Weiner, and that he had no knowledge that Weiner knew his brother Jack, but may have had a speaking acquaintance. When questioned by the committee, Earl Ruby did not mention that he had advised his brother to call Weiner in 1963. In his committee testimony, Weiner acknowledged going to school with Earl Ruby and that he might have met Jack Ruby 4 or 5 times in his entire life, but he was not sure when their last contact had occurred. Mike Shore, a Californian involved in the entertainment field, also attended school with Weiner and Earl Ruby, and he and Weiner had been involved in a number of business transactions. Jack Ruby also called Shore numerous times in 1963 to seek help with his labor problems, including calls in the days before and after the October 26 call to Weiner. Weiner stated that Shore never mentioned him the calls from Ruby. Shore may have prompted Ruby's call to Weiner, however, by mentioning the latter's name in one of his 1963 telephone conversations with Ruby. Ruby asked if he should call Weiner about the trouble he was having with the AGVA, but Shore replied, "What can he do?" Shore did not know if Ruby did call Weiner. Earl Ruby worked with Shore following the Oswald shooting to raise defense funds and to secure an attorney. Since Weiner and Ruby both had associations with organized crime and labor figures, it is possible that they had common associates, although no instances have arisen wherein Ruby and Weiner actually were found to be in contact as a result of any common associates. One possible link involves Jack Ruby's association and acquaintance with Paul Dorfman, a key figure in the organization and solidification of the coalition between organized crime members, the Teamsters Union, and HAFA. In 1940, Dorfman became head of the Waste Materials Handlers Union in Chicago. Ruby had briefly served as a union organizer under Dorfman for approximately 2 months, having held that position before Dorfman took over. Dorfman clearly remembered Ruby when interviewed by the FBI in 1963, although he said that since 1940 he had not seen Ruby except for a few chance meetings in the street. Paul Dorfman died in 1971, leaving his stepson Alan Dorfman to control and influence much of the Teamsters' illegal activities in conjunction with HAFA, thereby closely aligning him with Weiner. There is no documentation of any Ruby-Weiner contact through either of the Dorfmans. Executive session testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Weiner testified in executive session. That's interesting. Executive session, JFK subcommittee hearing, Tuesday, May 16th, 1978. House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations, JFK subcommittee. The subcommittee met at 9:25 a.m. pursuant to notice in room 1310, Longworth House Office Building. The Honorable Richardson J. Pryor, chairman of the committee, presiding. Present was Representative Pryor, Dodd, Fithian, and Sawyer. Also present are G. Cornwell, J. Hornbeck, J. McDonald, A. Purdy, J. Wolfe, H. Shapiro, E. Burning, T. Hutton, M. Ewing, A. Taylor, R. Morrison, L. Svensson, D. Billings, and W. H. Cross. The committee will come to order. The chair will ask Mrs. Burning, the clerk of the committee, to read for the record those members officially designated to be on the subcommittee today. Let me see if I can't skip over some of this bullshit. This is a lot of the administrative nonsense. All right, everything's called to order. All right, testimony of Irwin Weiner. Mr. Pryor, thank you. I understand, Mr. Weiner, that you've been given a copy of the rules of the committee. Yes, I have. At this time, I'll give a brief statement concerning the subject of the investigation. It is something we do for each witness. He reads the rules, blah, 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 blah. The chair recognizes Mr. Wolfe to begin the questioning. Mr. Weiner, you've been given a copy of the committee rules. The committee rules provided you are entitled to representation by an attorney. Are you aware of that? Yes, I am. You do not have an attorney. Do you waive your right to an attorney? I waive my right to an attorney now. What is your current residence? 7163 Carroll Court, Niles, Illinois. And what's your current business address? 1010 South State Street, Chicago. Are you affiliated with a firm? Yes. What's the name? American Bonding Agency. In what capacity? I'm the president. Mr. Weiner, the first area of questions will concern your relationship with Jack Ruby. For the committee members, this is listed on tab 2 of the briefing book. When was the first time you met Jack Ruby, Mr. Weiner? I don't know. I don't remember. I went to school with his brother Earl. Jack was a little older than I was. I might have met Jack Ruby 4 or 5 times in my life. What is the first time you recall? Oh, I can't recall. Did you know him in high school? I don't remember. Did you meet him prior to 1960, which was the election of President Kennedy? Oh, yes. Did you meet him prior to 1950? It could have been. Do you recall? I would say I probably met him in the 1930s. What were the circumstances of your first meeting? It was an older brother of a friend of mine, not even a good friend, somebody I knew. You're speaking of Earl. Yes. You met Earl in school. Right. You were friendly with Earl. Yes. Did you meet other members of the Ruby family? I don't think I did. Were you ever to the Ruby house? I don't believe I was. How much older than yourself was Jack Ruby? I don't have any idea. I know he was a few years older. You testified you believe you met him 4 or 5 times. Is that correct? Probably. What meetings with Jack Ruby do you remember? I don't remember any of them. How do you know you met him 4 or 5 times? I'm assuming I met him 4 or 5 times. I saw him with his brother, spoke to him a few times. I'm only going back, you're talking 30, some 40 years. All your contacts with Jack Ruby were during the 30s? No. When were your other contacts with Jack Ruby? He called me up one time. When was that? I don't remember. It was in the 60s, prior to the assassination. How much prior? I don't have any idea. You don't recollect that? I recollect the call, but I had a lot of other problems because of that call. Was that call on October 26th of 63? It could have been. About a month prior to the assassination? Could have been. At what time previous to that call do you recollect seeing Jack Ruby? Maybe 10 or 15 years prior to that. 10 or 15 years, correct. Why do you characterize yourself as having a lot of trouble concerning that call? I'll tell you what problem I have and the reason for my attitude. Evidently, as a result of this call, an agent called my house. An FBI agent. Yes, an FBI agent called my house and spoke to my daughter. It was right after Oswald was killed. He spoke to my daughter and asked where I was. I was in Florida at the time. She didn't know where I was. She had just come home from school. She told the agent she didn't know where I was, but expected to hear from me. I called the next day. She was shaking with fright because the agent had told her he wanted to talk to me about the assassination of the president. As a result of that, anytime anybody came and talked to me, I dismissed them. The FBI did contact you regarding that call? Yes, I never spoke to them about it. The reason you're not speaking is because of the way they mistreated my daughter. Did they mistreat your daughter? That's the extent of it. They scared her to death. You felt you should not speak to the FBI about the assassination of President Kennedy. You are 100% right. Did anybody else contact you regarding that call? Newspaper people. I refused to speak to them. A couple of your investigators. You refused to speak to our investigators. Is that correct? Right. What was discussed during that phone call? Jack Ruby called me. Evidently, he had a nightclub in Dallas. He had a striptease night, one night a week. He had an amateur striptease. Some union that was affiliated with entertainers had stopped him. They asked him to stop because the amateur entertainers were not members of the union. He stopped and another competitor of his opened up. He called me and wanted to know if I would write a bond. He was looking to get an injunction. The lawyer told him if he got an injunction, he would have to put up a bond. He asked me if I would do that, and I told him no. He told me he was going to file a lawsuit. That was the extent of our conversation. It was just in relation to that. I never heard from him since, and I never heard from him prior to that. You had no contact with him prior to that time? Absolutely no. How did Jack Ruby come to call you? Through his brother. That was my business, writing bonds. I don't have any idea. Why did you refuse to write the bond he requested? I didn't have the authority to write it. Did you direct him to somebody who did? No. Your testimony was that the business you were in at the time. I still am. Why do you say I had no authority to write the bond? If I remember correctly, I didn't think the company was authorized to do business in Texas. I didn't want to get involved in it. There was no way I could do it. Did you ever refer him to somebody in Texas? Could you have referred him to somebody in Texas? I don't know anybody in Texas who would write a bond. You don't do business with any firm in Texas? Not that I know of. What else was discussed during that conversation? That's all that was discussed. In that conversation, do you recall how long it was? I don't have any idea. Did you ask Jack about other people he may have contacted regarding that bond? No. Is it your knowledge of Jack Ruby's problems concerning the labor dispute solely from that conversation? That is the only conversation I had with him. Have you read in the public domain since that about time Jack Ruby's labor problems? No. You are not aware from any other source of the difficulties Jack Ruby had concerning... I read about his problems, after that. Other than that, no. What was the amount of the bond that Jack Ruby was seeking? I don't remember. When he started talking to me, all I did was look to get rid of him. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I was just being courteous. You had no contacts for 15 years previous to that call with Jack Ruby. I never had any contact with Jack Ruby, never socially. I never went with him anywhere, never broke bread with him, never had anything to do with Jack Ruby at any time in my life. What was the contact 15 years prior to that phone call? How the hell do I know? You testified. I'm just guessing. It could have been 30 years before. I don't know. What other contacts with Jack Ruby do you remember? I didn't have any other contacts with him. Did you ever meet with him? I told you I never met with him, never had coffee with him, never went to his house, never had lengthy conversation that I can remember, except that one phone call. As far as you know, Jack Ruby called you because of the relationship you had with his brother Earl. I don't know if that was it. I'm just guessing. Were any other individuals discussed during that phone call? Did Jack Ruby mention the name of any other people? No, he did not. He might have mentioned a lawyer. I don't remember. His lawyer? I don't remember. Did Jack Ruby ask you for any further help after you told him you could not write the bond? I don't remember if he did or did not. Did you refer Jack Ruby to any other people? No, I did not. The termination of your conversation was that you could not help Jack Ruby and that you knew of no individuals who could. Right. Did Jack Ruby reveal any of his further plans to you? No. Did you ever call Jack Ruby? No. I might have called, I might have returned a phone call. Maybe I wasn't at home. I don't remember the relationship of the call. It might have been that I received the call, and when I came, I answered the call. I never called him. You don't recall if you had been referred to Jack Ruby by anybody that Jack Ruby mentioned? No. Do you know Mr. Michael Shore? I sure do. How do you know Mr. Shore? I know Mr. Shore all my life. A boyhood friend of mine. Still is. Do you have business with Mr. Shore? Right now I have. During the period of time 60 to 63, did you have business with Mr. Shore? I don't think so. What is your business with Mr. Shore? Bringing products in from Japan. Mr. Shore is a close friend of yours. He's a very close friend of mine. Have you ever discussed with Mr. Shore the Jack Ruby phone call? No. Has Mr. Shore ever discussed with you Jack Ruby? Yes. What has he told you? He said that he arranged with Earl to try to get him some legal help, and there was an attorney in San Francisco that I think Michael Shore knew, and Earl wanted to hire him. I forget his name. Did Mr. Shore indicate anything else to you about Jack Ruby? That's about it. Did Mr. Shore ever discuss with you Jack Ruby calling him concerning the American Guild of Variety Artists? No. He never discussed that with you? No. Have you ever told anybody that Jack Ruby's call to you whether did not involve a labor dispute? No, I don't think so. Have you ever told anybody that the phone call to you was not involving national security? Yes. Who did you tell that to? To the FBI. When did you tell that to the FBI? A fellow called me. He wanted to see me, and I refused to see him. At any time this year, did you ever speak to a reporter who inquired about that phone call? I might have. Do you recall telling that reporter that the phone call did not involve a labor dispute with Jack Ruby? I might have. I might have told him anything. I might have just a reporter. I remember called me from Washington twice. I might have told him anything. What you told that reporter would be inaccurate. I would say it was inaccurate. It was not under oath. Correct. So if you told that reporter that Jack Ruby phone call did not involve a labor dispute, that would be incorrect. That is right. What was your personal reaction to the call when Jack Ruby called you? Were you surprised to hear from him? Very much so. Did you remember who he was? Oh, sure. Did he not have to identify himself to you? No. Did you actually do anything as a result of that phone call? Not a thing. Did you tell anybody else about that phone call? I told a lot of people about it. What did you tell them? I just told them what I'm telling you. Who did you tell about that phone call? I don't remember. You told a lot of people that you testified. I told a lot of people to make sure I tell you the truth. I'm sure I spoke to somebody about it, but I don't remember. You don't remember any name? I don't remember one name. Who was your business partner at the time? Louis Vollen. I don't remember whether I told him or not. You testified that your daughter answered the phone call from the FBI. Right. Did you explain to her why the FBI called you? I told her not to be concerned, that I didn't have anything to do with anything like that. Did you tell her that Jack Ruby had called you about labor problems? No, I didn't discuss it with her. Why did you not tell your daughter that was the explanation for the phone call? I probably didn't think she would understand it. I don't know whether I did or not. How old was your daughter at the time? Maybe 16. What's your daughter's name? Susan. Where does she live now? I'm not going to tell you. Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to direct the witness to answer that question. It is important to be able to corroborate part of this witness's testimony. It may be necessary for the committee to interview Mr. Weiner's daughter. Mr. Weiner, the committee certainly has no intention of harassing your daughter. Submit a list of questions, and I will submit it to my daughter, and I will have her answer. I don't want anybody to bother her. My daughter is a very nervous girl under a doctor's care, and I don't want anybody to harass her. She's under psychiatric care. Submit a list of questions. I will submit them to my daughter, and my daughter will answer them. Mr. Chairman, I think it may be necessary for the committee staff to investigators, perhaps not necessarily, but perhaps to interview Mr. Weiner's daughter to have an assessment of the credibility of both Mr. Weiner and his daughter regarding the phone call. Mr. Weiner, the committee is not interested in trying to scare your daughter or harass her in any way. It would be agreeable with the committee if we should find it necessary to contact her if we could make the contact through you first. Yes, you could, absolutely. If we attempt to make that contact, you will in fact put us in touch with your daughter at that time. I will cooperate with you 100%. Concerning the phone call you received from Mike Shore regarding getting attorney for Jack Ruby. I didn't receive the phone call. I spoke to him in person. Where was that? I don't remember. It was a long time ago. When was that? When? Approximately how long after Ruby shot Oswald was it? Oh, I don't know. The next time I saw him in those years, I could see him in trips in California, or if he just came to Chicago. I don't remember when or how it was. It was just a conversation. Did he ask you for any suggestions regarding representation of Jack Ruby? No. Mr. Chairman, I think at this point that it is appropriate for committee members to ask questions concerning Mr. Weiner's knowledge of Jack Ruby in the phone call that was placed on October 22nd. Are there any questions of the committee, or do you prefer to wait until the staff has completed its questions? I would just as soon wait. There will be no questions from the committee members at this time. Mr. Weiner, have you ever been to Cuba? Have I been to Cuba? Yes. When were you in Cuba? In 58 and 59. Was that one trip you're referring to? I made a few trips there. What was the purpose of your trips to Cuba? One or two for just pleasure. Another trip I made, I guess they were all for pleasure. You've never been to Cuba on business? Not that I remember. How about how many times did you go to Cuba for pleasure? Maybe 3 or 4. Were all those during the 1959 period? Yes. Were you ever in Cuba after Fidel Castro took over, which was January 1st of 59? Yes. When you were in Cuba, who did you visit? Whom did I visit? There was a friend of mine that worked in one of the casinos there. His name was Sarnoff. I visited him. Sarnoff. Let's see if we can't find anything on somebody named Sarnoff related to Cuban casinos, probably the Capri. Which casino did he work at? I don't remember. Did you visit anyone else on those trips? Not that I remember. Did you go by yourself or with other individuals? I went with somebody else. Who else did you go with? A fellow by the name of Felix Alderizio. Was he traveling for pleasure? Yes, as far as I know. On how many of your trips did you accompany Mr. Alderizio? I think all of them. I'm not sure. It's been a long time. At what hotels did you stay when you visited Cuba? The Nacional. I don't remember the other names. Did you know Mr. Mike McClaney? No. Did you ever see Jack Ruby on any of your trips to Cuba? No. Did you ever meet anybody in Cuba who said he had met Jack Ruby? No. Do you know Mr. Louis McWillie? No, I don't. No, that's hilarious. Of course he knows McWillie. Everybody knows McWillie. Do you recall traveling to Cuba with Alan Dorfman? Yes. Was he on all of your trips? Yes, he was. He was on all of your trips? No, he was on one trip. Which trip was that? Oh, I don't remember, but there were 4 of us on that trip. With the other individuals, Stuart Hops and Charles Bray. Right. What was the purpose of that trip? It was an insurance trip. I think that he had formed a company in Nassau, insurance company in Nassau. I think Stuart Hops was friendly with the ex-president of Cuba that was involved with him in an insurance deal. We went to deal with him. It was a relation with with insurance at Stuart Hops' suggestion. What was your relationship with Mr. Dorfman? My relationship at the time? Yes, we were involved in an insurance deal. What was the name of the insurance company? The Intercontinental Insurance and Surety Company? I think it was. Where was that company incorporated at the time of your trip to Cuba? I think it was a Panamanian company or a Mexican company. Was it ever a Cuban company? No. The charter from that other company was transferred from Panama to Nassau. I think the company was officed in Nassau and it was a Panamanian company. Do you know Mr. Dominic Bartone? No. Was one of the individuals you met on that trip to Cuba Mr. Louis Bodiful? On the trip to Cuba? Yeah, no. You met with him on that trip to Cuba. I met a Cuban attorney. I don't remember his name, but that could be it. If he was president of the Latin American Bar, that was the attorney. What did you discuss with him? Oh, I don't remember. Have you ever had any dealings with him? No. Did he ever discuss any officials of the Cuban government with you? I don't remember if he did or not. Did you know of any political or law enforcement individuals in Cuba? No, I didn't. Do you know Mr. Santos Traficante? Yes. Have you met Mr. Traficante? Yes. When were your meetings with Mr. Traficante? I met him at a club in Cuba. What club was that? I don't remember the name of the club. It was outdoor casino and nightclub. Do you remember what trip to Cuba this was on, Mr. Traficante? No, I don't. What other meetings did you have with him? I met him in Florida. When was that? That was about 1963. Was that prior or subsequent to the assassination? That was prior. How much prior? Oh, I don't know. How do you recollect it was prior to the assassination? Well, I'm just guessing. When was the assassination? November of 63. Well, it could have been before that or after that. I really don't know. Where did you meet Mr. Traficante? At the Fontainebleau Hotel. Were you staying there? Yes. How long were you in Miami on that trip? I had a legal matter in Miami. What was the legal matter? I was indicted in Miami. What was the indictment for? The indictment was for extortion. Why did you meet with Mr. Traficante at the time? He was friendly with my associate, who was also indicted. Who was your associate? Felix Alderizio. What was discussed in the meeting with Mr. Traficante? I don't know, just trivialities. What other meetings did you have with Mr. Traficante? I don't know. It was just about that time. The only meeting I remember. Was there more than one meeting at that time? He would come to see my friend. How long were you in Miami during that trip? I don't know. I think we had a 10-day trial before jury. I was in D.C. too. The attorneys came from Washington. Who else was present at your meetings, with Mr. Traficante, besides yourself and Mr. Alderizio? Oh, I don't remember. When you met with Mr. Traficante in Cuba, who else was present at that meeting? It was a nightclub full of people. Did you speak to Mr. Traficante at that time? Did I? Yes, apparently I did. Was anybody else in on the conversation? I never have had anything to really discuss with Mr. Traficante. How were you first introduced to Mr. Traficante? By Felix Alderizio. And when was that? This was in Cuba in 59? 59 or 60, yeah. Did you ever have any interest in the Cuban gambling casinos? No. Have you ever stated that for your services to Mr. Traficante that you were given an interest in a Cuban gambling casino? Did you ever state that? I might have. If you stated that, is it your testimony that it is incorrect? That is right. You never had any interest in any Cuban gambling casino? Absolutely none. Where did you state you lost a fortune in Cuba? Or did you state you lost a fortune in Cuba? I might have. If you stated that, was that correct? No. God damn, he's just like throwing himself under the bus with all these questions, huh? Did you lose any money as a consequence of Fidel Castro's takeover? Not one penny. Have you had any other meetings with Mr. Traficante aside from the two you have told us? I don't remember if I did or not. Have you spoken to Mr. Traficante over the telephone? Yes. When was your most recent contact with Mr. Traficante? I don't know. In the last year? What prompted the conversation? Some kind of bail bond. He talked to you concerning a bail bond? Yes, he thought he would need it and that that was the end of it. Did Mr. Traficante discuss with you his holdings in Cuba? No, I never discussed anything personal with Mr. Traficante. Did Mr. Traficante, during your meetings in 1963, ever discuss the political situation in the United States? No. Did you ever know Mr. Johnny Roselli? No. Have you ever heard of Roselli? Sure, I've seen him too. Have you ever spoken to him over the phone? No. Did you know Mr. Sam Giancana? Yes. Have you ever met with Sam Giancana? Sure. When did you first meet Mr. Giancana? I don't remember. Approximately when? 40s or 50s? Could have been 40s. What were the circumstances of your first meeting, do you recall? I don't recall ever meeting him for any particular, I just knew who he was. Who introduced you to Mr. Giancana? Could have also been Mr. Alderizio. Did you ever have business dealings with Mr. Alderizio? Yes. What were they? We were partners in some real estate at one time. We were partners involved in a shortening corporation. What period of time were you involved with Mr. Alderizio? I've known him since I was 13 years old. What period of time were you partners with Mr. Alderizio in business? I don't know. You mean the years in question? Yeah. I was partners with him in 56 to 60. And what corporation was that? It was Twin Foods Products. Are there any other corporations you were partners in with Mr. Alderizio? I'm trying to think. We were involved in real estate transaction. I don't remember any other companies being involved. When were you involved in a real estate transaction? Around the 60s. Did you ever have any business dealings with Mr. Giancana? No. Did Mr. Giancana ever ask you to obtain any bonds for him? No, I don't think so. Do you know Mr. James Fratiano? Yes. Have you ever met with him? Yes. When did you meet with him? Oh, I don't remember. The last time, I don't remember. What meetings did you recall with him? I'm just trying to think. I met him in California. When was that? I don't remember. Approximately 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't remember. What was your most recent meeting with him? I don't remember that either. I don't remember when I met him. The only meeting you recall with him was in California. I know I met him a few times. I met him in Vegas. How were you introduced to him? Oh, through Felix Alderizio, who was a friend of his. Do you know him socially? Yes. Have you ever had any business dealings with him? Never. Did he ever discuss Giancana and Mr. Roselli with you? No. Do you know Mr. Norman Rothman? I don't think so. You ever been to Dallas, Texas? Yes. Were you ever in Dallas in 60 through 63? I don't think so, no. What was the most recent time you went to Dallas? Oh, in the 70s, 71, I think. What was the purpose of that trip? A friend of mine had a business there, a fellow by the name of Saul Aman, A-M-A-N. What business was he in? He manufactures cooking machines. What was the purpose of your visit? He owed me some money. He called up and said he had it, and I went and met him in Dallas, and he got it. Do you happen to know Joe Savello? I don't think so. You ever heard the name? Offhand, no. Do you know Mr. Joseph Campisi? No. Have you ever heard that name before? I don't think so. What other business dealings have you had in Dallas aside from the ones you have told us about so far? I'm trying to think. I don't think I had any. Are you familiar with a club in Dallas called the Dallas Cabana? No. One of your business associates is Mr. Saul Schwartz. Is that correct? Right. No, yes. At one time we were involved in an agency. What was the name of that agency? I don't remember. Was it the Summit Fidelity and Surety Company? We were involved in that agency. That's an insurance company. It was Summit Fidelity Insurance Agency of Illinois, I think was the name. It was an Illinois corporation. Are you aware if Mr. Schwartz had any financial involvement with the Dallas Cabana? I don't know about that. I don't know what Dallas Cabana is. Apart from the Jack Ruby phone call to you concerning his labor problems, were you familiar with the Carousel Club at all? No. Did Jack Ruby mention during his phone call the labor union, which he was experiencing difficulties? I don't remember that. He might have. Would it refresh your recollection if I said it was the AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists? Could have been. All right, so we're going to stop right here for today. We're going to pick it right back up on page 21. And we'll start off with the AGVA, which is another mob operation. More to that than meets the eye. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If you have not yet subscribed to Bloody History World War II, please do so. Substack, it's bloodyhistory.substack.com. If you haven't bought the book, please buy the book. All that good stuff. And I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks.